Welcome to Unit 1, Introduction to Educational Psychology. In this PowerPoint presentation, we'll go through the various elements of educational psychology, what we'll be focusing on during this course. We'll touch briefly on the next unit, which is the history and development of educational psychology. And then we'll end off really with looking at the developmental phases, which make up the last unit of this module. So educational psychology as we have it today, or as we find it today, has developed over a number of years. It has gone through quite an evolution and various iterations and understanding of what it really is about. We'll talk a lot about that when we look at the history of educational psychology. But for now, as we understand, educational psychology is about studying and understanding the behaviors and the patterns of individuals within an educational setting and within learning environments. It's about providing methods and strategies to solve educational problems, and it's really about focusing on the developmental stages of an individual, particularly children. Educational psychologists in the past were very focused on looking for problems within people. Where are they deficient, or where do they show deficits or challenges? And they then have to work with that problem. Whereas today, educational psychology is about helping to support people with their differences. And so when they are different, when they approach learning or understand learning in a different way, educational psychologists are there to help find the best suited plans to support that learning process for that individual. So they support teachers, communities, school systems, parents, learners to help everyone reach their potential. Okay, and so it's also about understanding as much about the learner as possible, as I'm explaining to you now. It includes how they learn, what their barriers may be, how to support them, and equip their teachers with the tools needed to effectively support all of their learners, irrespective of the way in which they learn and the way in which they approach education. So there are many, many definitions of educational psychology. And of course, people differ in the way they understand the field, depending on what their background is. So if you have a more scientific background, your definition will lean to a more scientific explanation. If you have a background in education, you'll be focusing on that a lot more. So these are just some of the definitions out there, and you have to move towards a definition for yourself. What do you understand by the word educational psychology? You're also going to answer these questions through your assessments and through the various work that we're going to be doing in this course. So make sure that you feel comfortable in your understanding of the term. So why educational psychology? Educational psychology is important for us because it does help in planning and development over a long term. And so for teachers to have an understanding of educational psychology and to implement it within this space means that they'll be able to understand the way in which their learners work. It also helps them to plan strategies to effectively support their learners. It's not just about, when you see the word psychology, people think counseling, people think therapy. Educational psychology is about harnessing the information about individuals and using that information to guide them on a level that will best suit them. So what do I mean by this? So for example, educational psychology teaches us that children, let's use an example of a young boy. A young boy at the age of 7, although very engrossed in being on the playing field, being with their friends, being energetic, having as many friends as possible, it's also by the age of 7, where they learn to play by themselves, where they learn to be okay with not having to be surrounded by friends. So if you are a teacher and you see this behavior within a 7-year-old child, you might feel like there's something wrong here. What's happening? Why is this child not playing with others? But it's part of the developmental stage for that child. Why do boys engage in more risk-taking behavior? It's also part of their development. It's part of their bonding, and it's part of how they work their gross motor skills. Why are girls perhaps better at doing needlework and doing more finer activities? Because they are encouraged to use their fine motor skills from a young age. So oftentimes girls will be encouraged to engage in more safe play, and so those are things like drawing, picking up beads, or doing little sewing projects for their dolls. And so these types of things are important aspects for us to understand as educators, because it helps us to support our learners and helps us to understand what is quote unquote normal development and when there seems to be a challenge for a learner. So this is the timeline for the history of educational psychology. In this unit and in this PowerPoint, we won't be going through it in detail, but in the next unit, we'll have a longer discussion about exactly where educational psychology stemmed from, what the changes were within the field, and what it is like today. Just a brief overview of the history of educational psychology. Within this module and throughout the course, we'll also be looking at the theories of development. We'll be looking at Piaget's stages of cognitive development, what this means. We'll be looking at the stages of psychosocial development by Erik Erikson. This is a theory that is really used quite a bit throughout education, and so we'll go through it in detail a lot more in the units that follow. You may have heard of scaffolding within education, and as part of an individual student plan, we'll talk about the basics of scaffolding and where it's come from. We'll be looking at Bronfenbrenner both within this module, and if you're taking the inclusive education module as well, we'll look at how it works within our schooling system, in our communities, in our environments, and in our country, and understand the various elements that impact on learners. An important tenet of educational psychology is the developmental domain. So I spoke to you a little bit earlier about what we can expect to see in our learners at different ages. And so understanding the domains and the developmental domains of our children and of learners that we work with is going to help us to not only identify areas of concern or red flags, but also for us to use this information to plan effectively on ways that we will best be able to reach our learners. So as we go throughout this module, and specifically when we get to the later units, we're going to have quite a big focus on the developmental domains. You're going to learn a lot about what to expect at the various levels and various ages. Of course, we're going to be focusing on the intermediate phase, but we will be touching on the other phases as well, because it's important for you to know the stages through which children have had to go through to get to the intermediate phase. And we also need to know where our learners need to go and the milestones that they have to achieve to be able to get to the next level. So in this module and under the banner of educational psychology, we'll also look at the developmental domains specific to skills that our learners will require. So things like the gross motor skills, the fine motor skills. And for example, gross motor skills, we'll look at the importance of physical education. Within the realm of fine motor skills, we'll look at how important it is for learners to hold pencils in a particular way and what this means if they're unable to do so. So we'll look at this within the developmental domain portion of this module. Educational psychology also guides us to understand what level students are in terms of content subjects. So, for example, at what age within mathematics should they be able to know what fractions are and how comfortable should they be with fractions? It's going to be a very exciting journey for you because you will know exactly where your learners should be and how to identify red flags when you see it within your classroom space. Beyond this, you're going to be reading a lot of journal articles, which are very challenging because they can be very word heavy, but I will suggest that you write up summaries for yourself to help get through the amount of journal articles we will be reading. Journal articles give us an idea of what is happening in our world today within our specific South African context and of course the international trends. But I feel that after you really get the hang of going through them, you're going to enjoy the information that you will attain through the process. So welcome to an exciting journey. It's only the beginning of what is going to be a very informative, I hope, as well as enjoyable experience within this module. Please feel free, as always, to ask questions, to flag areas that you think we could focus on a little bit more. There will be a lot of videos. We're going to have a lot of resources in this module. It's going to be a lot to keep up with. So I will suggest that you work in teams or in groups to get through the content. I also suggest that you work at a measured pace. So decide on a time frame within which you want to complete all your work and try to do a journal a day or 2 or 3 journals a day, depending on how you're able to get through them. But the information that you need to get through is important. You cannot do the assessments without going through the information, because by the end of this module and then at the beginning of educational psychology 2, All of the work that we have covered in these various units are going to build the foundation for the more practical skills that we are hoping to work on next. So enjoy this module, go through your journal articles, and I really hope that you enjoy the assessment for this unit.